Morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us to discuss the impact of immigration. It will be a pleasure to host you today. I would like to also extend a warm welcome to our guest speakers, Mr. Pindi Mbele and Dr. Laven Samov. And again, thank you, both of you, for accepting our invitation. As COVID-19 continues to reshape our immigration landscape, many questions arise for international students, such as what is the impact of online learning? Will their permits be affected? When and how can they re-enter South Africa or our borders? What happens to them if they fall under the 33 category of students who were invited to come back to our campuses? But before we start that discussion, let me allow Dr. Samuel to just set the scene and just give us a sense of what challenges we've been facing as institutions. And what does it mean for international students? Dr. Samuel is the past president of International Education Association of South Africa, AISA. I'm sure you all know about our association. And he is currently a director of International Education and Partnership at DUT. He is the Senate representative on the University Council, as well. He's also a member of, he's also the immediate past chairperson of the Institutional Forum. He has previously been an academic head of the Department of Dental Sciences and Environmental Health, and served as a deputy dean and acting of the Faculty of Health Sciences before assuming his current duty. Or his current position. So I'd like to welcome you, Laven, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Norma, and good morning, colleagues. It's really my pleasure to be with you this morning, and thank you to UKZN for the invitation. It's a further pleasure for me to share the platform with our colleague from Home Affairs, Mr. Pindile Mbele, who we normally meet at our conference each year, but this year with the COVID-19 situation being what it is, we will not be having a conventional conference, so we will not be seeing him. So it's really a pleasure to have his input at this webinar. We today will be addressing the issue of immigration implications for international students under Lockdown 3. And my role is a fairly simple one. It's to sketch the background of where we find ourselves with this issue. At the start of lockdown, we had universities closing, we had all academic activities on the campus ceasing, and international students were encouraged to actually seek refuge in their own home countries. So many of our international students left the borders of the country and returned home. Some did remain in the country, and we only got a handle of the situation of who left and who remained at a point later on in lockdown, when we were able to see what the implications of the lockdown were for universities. So the situation is that we have international students both in South Africa as well as in their home countries. The lockdown in South Africa has meant that our borders have been sealed except for trade and South African nationals returning to the country. And this has been very, very strictly enforced. During lockdown level 4, we saw some students returning to our campuses, and that specifically pertained to medical students, the final year medical students being allowed onto the campus. Clinical years were being admitted incrementally, and universities that had medical schools had this to deal with. As the lockdown regulations changed and we saw the advent of lockdown level 3, universities were then allowed to admit a maximum of 1/3 of their students back for in-person teaching, and the remainder would continue with remote modes of learning, which different universities undertook in different ways. The 1/3 of students that were allowed to return included students in clinical studies, where clinical and practical work had to be done, as well as final year students in different courses. And herein started the challenge around international students. Firstly, there were students that fell into these categories of the 1/3 of students that could return. Medical students that had to complete the final year of their studies, medical and health sciences students who were in clinical years that needed clinical experience, and final year students who needed to write exams to complete a qualification and exit the system. I think health sciences students and science students have a particular challenge in that there are professional, clinical, and practical skills that need to be developed incrementally and can't be done in a very intensive short session that we could give when students return. So international students that have been stuck across the border have actually had a huge disadvantage, whereas their colleagues that are either remained in the country or South African students continue with their studies. These medical students, these health sciences students are not able to pursue their studies. These final year students are not able to pursue their studies. You might well say that universities have put in great effort to address the issues of data, connectivity, and devices. And I agree, universities have put in a lot of effort on this level. But I think we should understand that the situation in many of our neighboring countries from which we draw international students have huge issues of connectivity. Even if data is provided, the level of the connectivity is such that the learning platforms are actually too data rich to actually effectively be presented to the students in these situations. Equally, some of them live in conditions that are not conducive for studies, and we have this challenge. We've had large numbers of our international students write to us to inform us of their challenges, and we've been informed that the situation will only change in lockdown level 1. So we have a situation where we need to address the academic needs of our students as well as their overall well-being. And we would like to work with Home Affairs on how we can actually do this. We've heard of a situation we've heard of situations where international students have successfully crossed the border, and we're not sure on what basis this did happen. We also know that under lockdown 3 regulations, international learners at schools are allowed to cross the border for school instruction. Of course, we know that schools have now closed, but that was the situation through the lockdown level 3. We have a huge challenge in having this unknown factor, in not knowing when level 1 lockdown will eventually come into being. So we are not sure how to plan for our international students. We know that academic years have been extended into 2021. So we have a number of questions. How can we work together to address these challenges? What are the implications for the study permits if studies go into 2021? What engagements are perhaps happening in the background that we might be not aware of, but could help us inform the situation? And also that we have undertaken engagements as IESA through USAF to bring this matter to the attention of the authorities that make these decisions. We also had a reputational risk as a destination for international students, and there is sometimes a feeling that not enough is being done to address the situation of international students. So it is a conundrum that universities face collectively, And I'm hoping that working with Mr. Mbele and his unit will help us address some of these issues. Norma, that is the background situation that I've sketched now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Laven, for such an extensive overview of the challenges that we are facing. I would like to introduce Ms. Dembele, who is the Director at Home Affairs in the Immigration Branch, responsible for stakeholder relation management between the department and corporate entities, corporate employers, and institutions of higher learning regarding temporary residence visa matters, as well as assisting and advising corporate employers who have the intention of positively contribute to the South African economy growth through the employment of needed foreign labor, the entry of exceptionally skilled or qualified people, and the promotion of tourism. So, Ms. Dembele, here we are. Please join us to address our attendees this morning. We have a lot of questions that have been sent to us, and I know there are also questions that are being sent, especially now. People are joining in, and they're asking a lot of questions about the challenges that are facing international students. So thanks again for accepting our invitation. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Chairperson, and good morning to the panel, as well as the invited guests and the participants to the webinar. I sincerely believe that we will be able, to a greater extent, be able to address the concerns and the issues that the university has, as well as the students themselves, in as far as the current environment of the COVID-19 is concerned. I've made a few notes from the input of Laven, regarding some of the frustrations and the challenges that the students find themselves faced with, including the university as well, in terms of its role in assisting and ensuring that the students are able to, to complete their studies. And I hope that, in the inputs that I make, I'll broadly be able to answer most of those questions. Maybe it will be best if I start first by giving the background that will explain the current situation of where we are. You would know that at the beginning of the national lockdown, that was at the time when, at the advice of scientists and health experts, we were advised as South Africa that we should close our borders and have a national lockdown, so as to allow government and the health authorities to have systems in place and to create capacity to be able to deal with projections and estimated infections of COVID-19. Now, what had to follow then was that government, through the National Command Council, had to come up with regulations and rules as to how certain activities will be regulated during the lockdown. Now, one of the first activities that we put in place was to say that we are closing our borders, and as we were preparing to do that, some of the people, I would speak specifically to foreign nationals, which includes both students and people who are employed in South Africa in different capacities, and also your ordinary visitors who had been here on holiday. Some of them left prior to the lockdown because of the uncertainty as to how long the lockdown was going to take. And some of them remained in the country. Some of them, moved to different provinces. And we also know that universities as well, as part of them managing the prevention of COVID, also decided that students should vacate campuses and go to their places of residence. Now, at that time, then government brought together all the different ministers of different ministries to come and give input as to, in their area, what is it, or what measures are they, or were they going to put in place to prevent the rapid spread of COVID. And each minister had to publish regulations related to their area to say this is what will be allowed, these are the activities that will not be allowed, and so forth. Now, as the ministers of the different departments were working on their regulations, they also had to ensure that there was a synergy between the regulations that they were issuing. So a minister in the Department of Transport had to ensure that whatever regulations that they were publishing were in line or not in conflict with another regulation issued by another ministry. And where such conflicts were discovered, the regulations were amended to correct that. Now, the overriding principle that affects all other regulations that are issued by other ministers in terms of the National Disaster Act is that South Africa, as we speak, there is no international travel that is allowed into South Africa, except for the exceptions that were published. For instance, we know that there are people who are foreigners who receive their medical treatment in South Africa. So we could not prohibit them from traveling to South Africa. So we allowed that. But then also taking into consideration our obligation as a country to the countries that are bordering South Africa, especially in the SADC region. Most of those countries are dependent on South Africa for their sustenance in terms of the food that South Africa sends to the shops and so forth. So truck drivers driving across the borders were also allowed. So there are some of those few exceptions which are actually handful. They are not more than 5. So those ones were the ones that were indicated as exceptions under which foreigners would be allowed, or cross-border movement would actually be allowed. So we also mentioned that in terms of our constitution, there are only 2 categories of people who have a right to enter South Africa. It is a South African citizen. So a South African citizen that is abroad, whether they are in Botswana or whether they are in France or whether they are in America. If a South African says, I want to go home, regardless of whether the borders are closed or not, we have an obligation, and that South Africa has a right in terms of the constitution to enter South Africa, regardless. So that is the first group. Then the second group of people that is allowed to come into South Africa are the permanent residents. Permanent resident, a person that has been given the right of permanent resident in South Africa. That person, during the lockdown, if they were outside, they have a right to come to South Africa. And those people, because commercial flights could not be allowed and are still not allowed to enter South Africa, could only come to South Africa through what we call repatriation flights. So there would be a flight that would be prepared for South Africans in London, and then or in whatever country, they would go to the mission and record that I am a South African, I want to go home. You saw at the beginning when we brought some of our people from China, from Wuhan, who wanted to come back to South Africa. So there were those repatriation flights. But then also the Constitution also says that any foreign national that wants to leave the country, they are allowed to leave if they want to leave. But the ability to leave and, you know, the process that allows them to leave, the foreigner should be able to prove that, you know, they are able to leave. For instance, South Africa cannot arrange a flight for a foreign national to depart. So what happened is that most of the other countries also arranged repatriation flights for their citizens who were in South Africa who wanted to depart. So those people were able to depart. And then the understanding is that any other foreign national that remained in the country and is still in the country did not want to depart. So that is the understanding that we have. Now, I would assume, and also from the reports that we get from the universities, that then you also had other foreign students who then decided that I am departing because I do not know how long this thing is going to take. But also it was also influenced by the fact that some universities said student must leave. So a student from Limpopo could go back to Limpopo, but maybe a student from Germany who does not have residence, any other residence other than on campus, decided that I will take a flight back home. Now, we then also issued in our regulation an instruction that said that people who had applied for visas at the time of the lockdown, all those visas were revoked or were withdrawn, meaning that they would not use that visa to come into South Africa. And then we also have another point of countries that usually or generally they are visa exempt. For instance, people in America, when they want to travel to South Africa, they just need their passport, they go to the airport, get into an airplane and come to South Africa. But then we took away all those visa exemptions, meaning that at the current moment as we speak, if an American wanted to come to South Africa, they would need to go to our mission and apply for a visa. So that is the impact of that decision to say we withdraw all the visas. Now, we then had those restrictions, which included restrictions within the country, within South Africa. People were not allowed to travel from one province to another. Everyone had to remain where they are. And that restriction still remains. Me and you as South Africans, we are unable to travel from province to province unless we provide the reasons that have already been gazetted. If a family member passes in Eastern Cape and I'm here, then I can get a permit to travel across the border and so forth. Now, during this period up to now, we have been having amendments to the regulations, taking away some of the restrictions. They're calling it the easing of the lockdowns, where, for instance, yesterday, the Department of Tourism has decided that now people can go and sleep at hotels as long as it is within their province. So the understanding of the regulations should be in context. So it is not a blanket statement to say, now I can go and visit Limpopo and sleep at the hotel that I've always wanted to go to for leisure. They have said that they've allowed leisure for accommodation, but within the province. So a person that is in Johannesburg can go and sleep at the hotel in Johannesburg, but they cannot go and travel across Gauteng to another province to say, I'm going to sleep over at a hotel. So that is the context that we was given yesterday. Also, the people at the hospitality industry, the restaurants, complained that the lockdown that says at 9 o'clock people must not be in the street, it is affecting them because most of the families or people have their dinner in restaurants around 8 o'clock and so forth. Now they cannot rush, so they requested an extra time, an hour or hour 30 minutes, and government only granted an hour. So the curfew, which was starting at 9, now starts at 10 to accommodate guests that eat at the restaurants. I am giving this background to, to give you an indication that different industries are impacted differently by the regulations that are there. And they are able to lobby and speak to their ministers to say, but minister, in our area, this is giving us a problem. And remember, the curfew that people must be not in at the streets by 9 o'clock was not drafted by the Department of Tourism, but it affected them. And they raised it with their minister, who then raised it in the National Command Council that I have mentioned, that all ministers sit there. Now, the same principle applies to universities. So when the minister of DHET decided that people will now be allowed to come back on campus, that was the first principle. Then he had to decide what volume of people or how many people will be allowed. Then we spoke about the 1/3 and so forth, and then it came to 33%, and then also the discussion would have been then, if you say 33% of students must return, which student? How do you decide which students? Then minister then had to break it down. Final year students or medical or clinical students. But then in those deliberations, he has to consider what regulations does Home Affairs have in place. So the Minister of Higher Education, or any other minister for that matter, cannot then make a regulation which is in contravention with the regulation that says the borders are closed. So that is why you would see in the Back to Campus booklet that I've sent for distribution, the Minister of DHET then put down the different levels and said that international students, with the understanding that they are abroad and the borders are closed, will only be allowed back onto campus at level 1. And he also then qualified that statement further to say, provided that the prevailing conditions at that time allow for international travel. Meaning that me, as the Minister of Higher Education and Training, I'm not giving authority or authorization for international students to travel, whereas the Minister of Home Affairs has said that the borders are closed. So whatever announcement I'm making is subject to what is happening at the borders. So Laven raised the point to say that, and correctly so, the concern is that we don't know when we are going to be at level 1, and that is the concern, to say if international students are only going to be allowed at level 1, we might even get to level 1, but we find that the prevailing COVID conditions at that time do not allow for the borders to be opened. So the Minister of Higher Education might still come back and say international students are not allowed at level 1 because the borders are closed. So that is also a consideration that we need to think about when we read these regulations across the different directions issued by ministers. Now, you would then remember also that the Minister of the Department of Basic Education also issued her regulations, which we all know that from time to time, based on the inputs from different stakeholders, have been amended either upwards or downwards, depending on the risk and so forth. You would know that regulations were published, schools are going to be opened, and then regulations were amended, schools are going to be closed. Regulations were amended, certain grades will be allowed, and then regulations were amended, certain grades will now be not allowed at school. Now, I'll use the DBE as a perfect example. Now, when the minister said that grade 12s are going to be allowed back at school. The minister was then told by the different schools that we have in grade 12 international students or international learners that travel between borders from Lesotho, from Swaziland, from Botswana, students who are not resident in South Africa. They come here in the morning with a bus, and then in the afternoon when the school goes out, they go back to Botswana. Then the regulations of the Department of Education had to indicate that. And also the Minister for the Disaster Management Act, Dr. Nkosazana Zuma, had to update those restrictions across the borders. That is why we had an amendment that says learners that come through to South Africa on a daily basis who are international learners will be allowed to come back in and out. Now, when we allowed them in and out, then a question gets raised that comes from the regulations of the Department of Health. The regulations of the Department of Health say that if you are a foreign national and you travel into South Africa, you have to be quarantined for 14 days at a special place before you can proceed. Now, the question is, a student or a learner, a grade 12 learner who travels every day, where are you going to quarantine them? If they come into South Africa, you're going to put them somewhere else for 14 days. And then if they are not COVID positive, what are you going to do? Because that student on a daily basis goes back to Botswana, comes back in, goes back to Botswana, comes. So quarantining them for 14 days or 10 days really will not serve any purpose. It will actually eat into their time or their class time. So then the Minister of Health had to draft exemptions and say people who are traveling in on a daily basis will just be tested for those COVID symptoms, but they will not be quarantined. But that exemption would have to be applied for. That exemption also applies to the driver of the school bus that comes in, or the taxi and so forth. So when we read these regulations, we had to understand the context in which they are written. The fact that a grade 12 learner has been exempted and allowed to travel into South Africa to attend school and goes back does not take away the fact that the border is still closed for an international student that is at a university. That still remains. Now, I have given an example of the Department of Tourism that the stakeholders within that industry approached their minister and said, but minister, this rule of the curfew, for an example, this is how it is affecting us. The rule that people cannot come and sleep at hotels for leisure, this is how it is affecting us, and so forth. And the Minister of Tourism had to go and present it at the National Command Council, and actually even presented the one where they said, we want people to have alcohol in restaurants when they are having their meals. And she came back yesterday, she said, guys, I presented your request. These two were approved, but the one for alcohol unfortunately remains unapproved. Now, I'm basically saying in other words that this is how the International Students Association of South Africa is supposed to actually be pursuing this matter. What AISA or universities themselves are supposed to be doing as we speak now was to say, when the Minister of DHET said a certain percentage of students can come back on campus, and then the minister then also gave the categories of those. Universities themselves were supposed to say, you know, if minister, you are saying medical students can come back, University A, B, and C were supposed to say, at my university, the category that you are talking about of medical students, at my university, that category, is made up of all international students, or that category 50 or 20 or 7% of my medical students are from abroad, they will not be able to come back because the borders are closed. Can our Minister of DHET say to the Minister of Home Affairs, under the exceptions, medical students, or under the exceptions, the Minister of Home Affairs can say, the borders are still closed, except for final year international students in these categories. Or borders are still closed, but every student who is an international, who is in final year and is in medical should be allowed. Then that would be something that I don't think would be a problem. Like I've said, that regulations are amended on a daily basis, whereas especially in cases where we see that they are creating problems. And obviously also, universities will then be able to motivate that if these international students who are final year students, who are medical students, we allow them to cross the borders, they are able to finish their program this year, they will actually be creating space for South Africans that, or for other students that need to come next year. And they will actually contribute to reducing the disruption to the academic year next year. And I have consistently said this to universities to say, I find that one university wants to speak for itself as if when we grant access to international students, we'll say only universities from KwaZulu-Natal or only universities from UFS. And you would know everywhere else, when a decision is made, the decision to say people now can eat up until 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock, they did not say no, only for restaurants or for restaurant A and B. It applies for everyone. So as an industry, or as stakeholders in a particular area, this is the approach that was supposed to happen. Universities should not behave as if they do not have a minister. Universities should be able to communicate their requests and their concerns to the minister and say, Minister, what you have put in your regulations is DHET regulations. What you have put in your regulations is affecting us negatively in this way and so forth. Can we have a concession that international students who are first year, who are final year students, even if the universities can say, you know what, Minister, in fact, our final year students who are international, in terms of the numbers, they are not really so many. We could actually say all final year students who are international, let them come back on campus. You know, it's universities to decide how they will craft that in terms of them advising the minister. So the situation as it stands now, reading both regulations together, the regulation of the Department of Higher Education does not allow international students to come back up until level 1. The regulations of Home Affairs do not allow international students, because they fall under category of foreigners, to come back to South Africa up until we have opened the borders. So that is where we currently stand. So, Chairperson, universities have to elevate this through their minister, so that then their minister will then be able to assist them. Then we come to the point where Dr. Laven has raised it, other universities have raised it as well. They say, but there are other students who have come into South Africa and successfully so. You would remember that, colleagues, we have, during this period, we also unfortunately find ourselves in a situation where people do not keep up with the developments as they happen on a daily basis. And for obvious reasons, we are currently at a stage where we are having information overload. Sometimes you watch TV for 3 hours, You leave it, and just after you leave, there's a minister that comes in, announces regulations, and you are not even aware of them, to pick them off. So it also happens to our officials as well. Our officials, especially the ones who are outside and officially in Namibia, might not be able to keep up with all the announcements that are made. Sometimes you find that a minister makes an announcement or speaks through a press briefing, but what he's saying has not yet been documented, so it cannot be applied, even though the intention is there. So I have seen people saying that, but no, there are students in Namibia that were allowed to come through and so forth. And I always say that we should also look into the merits of the case. And I will go back to the statement that I made. A permanent resident has the right to come back to South Africa, same way to a South African. Now, if you understand the history of Namibia, you would know that Namibia prior to 1994, those people were South Africans, they fell under South Africa. And in 1994, the majority of those people at that time were granted permanent residence. So a person, you might find that a person is still a Namibian, but has a permanent resident that they got historically because of having been part of South Africa. So when a person says, yeah, but we know student in Namibia, sometimes I spend a lot of time just investigating one case and I find that the person is a permanent resident. And then sometimes I find that, maybe there was a mistake that was made and so forth, because maybe the people at the border did not understand the directions that were issued. But then also as well, you might find that a student approaches our border wanting to come back to South Africa because they have been issued with a permit by a university to say you can travel back to come back to South. Now, the person at the border at that time is confused to say, no, international travel is not allowed, but here's a university that has issued a permit. And you will see that even in all our regulations, there is no permit for cross-border. It is not there. The only permit that is allowed is that one that is specific for students, like I have mentioned. But you find for learners in the DBE, but you find a university issuing a letter that says, yes, this is our student, is a final year medical, and we have issued them an instruction to come back. Now, we also then find also other students who say, my friend has been allowed to come back. I'm also going to travel back to South Africa. Or they are given the authorization by our mission or the embassy abroad to travel. And I'm speaking mostly about the land borders, because internationally it's quite hard for a person to go into an aeroplane. Even if they have anything issued by the university, they would not be allowed. But on the land borders, it's a bit of a problem. Like I've said, communication doesn't, get distributed very well. I had a student who rocked up at a university, and the university had not invited them back, and the university refused them. That student slept at the gate of the university. The journalist came and saw the student sleeping there, took photos, and said, look how this university is treating the international student. This is xenophobia. And the university said, no, but we did not invite this student back. Because in any case, the room where this student was staying would have been allocated to the 33% that we have allowed back. So there are those challenges that you find with the miscommunication that is happening. But generally and broadly, as a principle, foreigners are not allowed to come back into South Africa in whatever category that they are, except where those exceptions are done. I don't want to labor too much on this. I believe that maybe there might be specific questions that would not have been addressed by the input that I have made, and I will give it back to you, Chairperson, so that you can lead me going forward.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mbele, for enlightening us. I am sure we all now on the same page in terms of understanding the regulations and what the universities need to do going forward. We do have a number of questions, and I think some of them you've covered them. But I think we will then maybe just pick few questions, because we also don't have a lot of time, so that you can respond to those questions. I've also going to ask Nombuso to just give us those questions that have been asked before. While she's trying to do that, there's one question that that we got also on Q&A, saying, assuming the restrictions on cross-border movements remain in force up to the end of the year, in a situation where one study visa is expiring by the end of the year, which December 2020, will the students who opted to stay in SA be allowed to renew their study visas? So there's one of the questions that perhaps you can deal with that. And then we've got a lot of other questions regarding online and the exams as well. Obviously that's a question for directly to the universities, because obviously if the students are engaging online, so there is also a way of them them writing the exams as well, or assessments. So that's obviously it's a question that is directly for the universities. So there's also a question of people wanting to renew their visas who are still in SA, and also the people that we're still waiting we're still waiting for their permits. So they also want to know what they need to do, because the VFS offices are not open. And I saw a question also about embassies. If embassies, I don't know where it is now, but if embassies are actually open, even though we're still under lockdown 3. Yeah. So maybe you can address some of those questions, and then we can get another round of questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Norma. Okay, there's another point that I wanted to clarify about international students, specific to the provisions that the Minister of DHET made, and I just want to make sure that we all have a common understanding of that. The minister said that international students would be allowed on campus at level 1. And this statement is related to international travel. Now, it does not mean that if there is an international student that when the lockdown began, that international student left KZN and came to Johannesburg, that when the university decides that we are bringing back students on campus, that international student who is in South Africa should be excluded up until level 1. I hope that is not the understanding. An international student that is in South Africa, never left, has, I don't want to use the right, but should be considered to be sent back, or should be considered to be received back on campus. So students are not being excluded because they are international. They are excluded because they are foreigners who are outside. But as an international student, if within your own calculations they fall within your number and they are here, they are supposed to come regardless of the level. So I hope they are not being excluded to say no, you are here in KZN, we see you, but you'll only come back on level 1. That is not the case. It speaks about people who are abroad. So we have international students who are in South Africa at the moment. They should be allowed if they are part of what the university wants to bring back, meaning that they do not have a higher right than a South African. So if if maybe they were a South African that is in Limpopo and you were going to exclude them, you can still exclude them. But if you were going to call them back and they are here, then they should be allowed. They don't have to wait for level 1. And then also, then it's there's also the same international students who are in the country. We have 2 categories. There's one who has applied for a visa at VFS, and then we closed our VFS before this person gets an outcome of their visa. We issued the regulations that says that the study visa that this person has in their passport, if it expires during the lockdown, would be extended up until the 31st of July. Automatically, it will be valid up until the 31st of July, which is today. Last week, Minister then made a statement in Parliament during the budget vote to say that the department is considering extending the date of the 31st of July to the 31st of October, right? So all students, or generally all foreigners who are in South Africa with a visa that has expired during the lockdown, their visas are considered to be valid until today and will then be considered valid up until the 31st of October. Minister has said it publicly. We are going to publish the regulations that puts it as implementable. So they are going to be extended, they are going to be considered valid until the 31st of October. Now, what has been happening is that during the lockdown, we have been having a few skeleton staff at Home Affairs that has been processing applications and so forth, you know, using this opportunity, as they normally say, never let a good crisis go away. So during this time, we said, no, let's take an opportunity, you know, to process those applications that have been with us. So we have been processing applications, and after we established that we had processed enough applications, we then said VFS should open from the 1st of July. They opened the 1st of July for collections of outcomes, of visas. So if a student has a pending visa application at Home Affairs, and this excludes appeals. I'm not counting appeals. I'm not counting permanent resident. So if you applied for the renewal of your visa, for the extension of your visa, or the changing of condition of your visa, and your application was pending with us, we have processed it during July. We have sent it to VFS, but in order for VFS to comply with the social distancing protocols, they are sending out notifications in batches. So a student will get a notification that say your visa is ready for collection, and then that student will have to make an appointment at VFS to go and collect. So they collect on appointments. So that deals with those ones who have applied. And then there's others who have not applied. The one that you mentioned, the visa expires in December 2020. That student will be allowed to apply once we allow for applications. Now we are only allowing for collections. Once we allow for applications, the student of 2020 December will be allowed to apply in South Africa for the renewal of their visa. Another thing also, all foreigners, including students, who have a visa that have expired now, and they want to leave South Africa, they want to depart, and there's a repatriation flight, or whatever arrangement that has been made, they want to depart, and they have an expired visa, they may do so without being punished that they have an expired visa. So the visa is considered to be valid. We are also not arresting any person that has an expired visa during this period, because automatically we have extended it up until the 31st of October. Thank you, Chairperson.
So I would like to ask Mr. Mbele about people who had job offers and they'd already applied for their critical skills visas outside of South Africa in February before the lockdown. What's happening in terms of receiving responses from the missions outside of South Africa?
Okay, thank you, Blessing. I'll take another question from Liberty.
I just want to ask one quick question. As also international students, I heard he was speaking about the issue of permits. What about if you have a passport that expired in July? Yes, because most of the students that I know, they would passport that expires in June and July. What happens to those two? Do the same conditions as visas apply to them too, because they can't go to their countries to renew their passports? Thank you.
Like I said in the beginning of the webinar, any foreign national that has applied for a visa at the time of the lockdown and they had not traveled to South Africa, that visa application is withdrawn. That visa application is cancelled. Any person who had applied for a visa or a work visa and we had issued them with a visa and put it in their passport, and they had not traveled to South Africa, that visa, we have nullified it. It is no longer valid. That's the first one. The second one, by Liberty, passport renewals. Passport renewals, Liberty, a passport is a document that is issued by your own country of origin. Now, I will just give you a typical example. I have a South African CEO who is in India. He has a passport that is expiring now in 3 months. He wanted to apply for a visa in India because he's working there. India says, we want a new passport from you, a South African passport, which is has a period or is valid for more than 12 months. Now, he, the CEO, has gone to our embassy in India to apply, because he's there in New Delhi, to apply for our passport. Because India has said to him, if you do not have a passport that is valid, we are not going to give you a visa. Now, he is talking to me because he wants his South African passport so that he can get a visa to be in India. The same narrative applies. We will not be able to give a visa to a foreigner who is in South Africa but does not have a valid passport. So a valid passport is obtained from your country of origin, and that arrangement has to be made with your embassy to get your passport up to date. Thank you.
Stone, are you on the floor?
Thank you so much, Norma. We have got a burning issue, Mr. Mbele, of students that have to complete their studies this year. That means the study permits are expiring end of December. And the academic year has been extended to 2021. What happens to their study permits, and also what happens to their medical aids if they have to come back to campus in 2021 just to complete their studies? That is my question.
All right. I just want to ask, sir, you said something about the visa period being extended. If your visa expires on the 31st or during the lockdown, the extension has been given from the 31st to the 31st of October. So given that usually what happens is you're encouraged to apply for a renewal 2 months before the expiring date of your visa. So technically now the visa expires, your visa technically now expires on the 31st of October. So the question now is, given that if it gets to the 31st, your visa expires, 31st of October, it expires. And like I said previously, you're encouraged to apply 2 months before the expiring date. So if it gets to the 31st, does it mean that the VFS office will open before the 31st? Or if it happens that after the 31st, if it happens that it gets to the 31st, when exactly with the visa will you be given the opportunity to renew the visa before the 31st, or will you be given the opportunity to renew the visa after the 31st of October? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I want to ask if there was these international students who completed during the lockdown, so the students graduated, and luckily the students have found employment, but here is where his current visa will not permit him to do such a job. So what is the position of this condition in the midst of this lockdown? So what are the avenues available to such a student? What must the students do so that it will enable the student to work? Thank you.
All right. Thanks, colleagues, for those questions. I'll start with the one from Stone Ramaju. Stone, what we are going to do once we allow for the resumption of accepting applications, we will communicate some of the adjusted requirements that will have for the extension of applications. Like for instance, for the extension of visas. For instance, you've mentioned that in terms of the academic year or in terms of the program that the student is in, the student was supposed to have completed this year, December, and the visa expires this year, December. What will then happen if they have to extend maybe for another 3 months or 2 months next year? We will make the adjusted requirements to say for the 3 months, because it will not be a full academic year, what is it that the student needs to submit and so forth. And your question or the question by Ovet is actually tied to what you are saying. Ovet was saying that currently we are saying the student or people must apply 60 days before the expiry of their visa and so forth. This current provision will not apply in the current situation, because already people have expired visas. So we are not going to have that period of it must be 30 days or 60 days before and whatever. So the 31st of October itself is not an indication that we are saying that we are going to open 60 days or 30 days before. At whatever date that we open, student will be able to apply. Haruna speaks about what we receive as inquiries a lot. For instance, we have said that during this period, people will not be allowed to change conditions of their visa. But I think also there's a bit of misunderstanding, because in the questions that I saw, the pre-submitted questions, there's a person who says, what happens after the lockdown? Because I'm told that I will not be able to change conditions. That is not the case. We are saying you cannot change conditions now during the lockdown. And what do we mean? What we are saying is that if you have a study visa, like in the example mentioned by Haruna, you can't say, no, because I'm not on campus, I am sitting at home, now I have received an offer of employment, I can go and work with my study visa, or I can go and do something else with my study visa. You are not allowed. Because also during this period, any employer that issues you with an offer of employment must comply with the requirements of the Department of Employment of Labor. One requirement there is that the position must be advertised and South Africans must be considered. And if no South African could not be found, the Department of Labor must issue a certificate to the employer to say that you can employ a foreign national. So I do not understand how an employer can give you an offer if they have not complied to that, which means that if you do happen to work for that employer, it will be in a contravention of your visa conditions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mbele, for a very informative session. The question I have centers around the Department of Labor and Home Affairs talking to each other, in the sense that we have foreign students whose work permits, whose study visas have expired as of 31 July. They're still in the system and they do get a point. So we still have the students in our system who do tutoring for us. And some of them even are fortunate enough to do some temp teaching because they're at the PhD level. Now, obviously, they're earning an income with an expired visa. Will the Department of Home Affairs issue a directive to say that with the extension of 31 October, these category of students are permitted to work within the institution? Thanks.
I want to ask some few questions. I left South Africa about 6 months before the lockdown. Unfortunately, I was cut off in Nigeria. Before now, my visa expired. And when I contacted the South African embassy in Nigeria, I was asked to bring a South African police clearance, which I've been trying to get in contact there so that I can resume my studies. I'm on postdoc program, actually. But my problem now is, how can someone get a police clearance from Nigeria when actually they're supposed to require him to pick a police clearance from Nigeria when he is in Nigeria? It's like someone is now trying to say, don't come back. I don't know, please, can you, if it is within your position, to highlight on that area, please?
Yes, thank you very much for the opportunity. I've got 3 questions, actually. We have international students coming from Lesotho that are currently on exchange program abroad, sent by our institution. And we have been battling to get them back since beginning of June. And as a result of that, then we have had to extend their stay because it was also linked to a scholarship there. Then these students could not also, I don't know whether we have, if they qualify for the repatriation flights that are coming to South Africa, because in any event, for them to be able to go back to their country, they have to first come through OR Tambo and then CUT and then back to Lesotho. So we have not been able to get any response from the embassy in the country that they are in to return them back home. So I just want to find out if they qualify for the repatriation flights, or what would you advise we do? My second issue is that these students, they have extended, we have extended their stay. Their visas will come to, their study visas will be expiring in December. So their extension is up until January 2021, when they will have now officially to come back. So when they get to the airport, are they going to be deemed as undesired people? Is that going to have any effect on their study visa, future study visa in SA? Because now their visa, they will come back basically with no study visa. And then the third one is of a colleague who is now in Zimbabwe, who has a permanent residence and has been in Zimbabwe since the beginning of lockdown. And we have not been able to repatriate him back to South Africa. So my question is now, what do we need to do in this case? Thank you.
I'm going to start with the one from Calvin Thomas, which is about people or students who are working on an expired study visa, doing that prescribed work activity that does not exceed so many hours per week. Yeah, Calvin Thomas, that's a genuine concern. We have heard that as well from other people who are not students. They are having a problem with their expired visas. So what we are planning to do is that as soon as Minister publishes the Gazette that extends the visas to the 31st of October, alongside that, we are going to issue communication that goes to the banks, that goes to the employers, to say that the student must be allowed or a person that has an expired visa should be considered to be having a valid visa, because we also get from the universities and sometimes by individuals saying the banks are closing their accounts because they say your visa is expired. So we'll also be accompanying this with an official communication to the different institutions to say, consider the visas to be valid. And that will also cover your students that are working on expired visas. The one by Louis Akpan, it's a genuine question, but also, you know, the reason why the people in our embassy want a police clearance, it is because it is a requirement. It might not make sense now, but it is a requirement that is required under normal circumstances. But because we are in a period of COVID, you will not be able to fulfill this requirement. But also, before we even get to the point of you being requested for a police clearance, the embassy should not even be entertaining you submitting an application. The reason why we have stopped embassies accepting applications is because applicants also will not be able to meet the requirements of the documents that we want there. So before you can even go and look for a police clearance, they are not even supposed to be accepting your application under the current condition, because generally, as we speak, embassies are closed. And they might have entertained you because of that confusion that says applications for international students or final year and whatever. And maybe that's what they wanted from you. But we can't want a police clearance from you when you are abroad, a South African police clearance. How are you going to obtain it? So the best way to deal with this is that we shouldn't even be entertaining an application from you up until the time that we allow for applications. And when we allow for applications, we'll address issues like this: police clearance, medical, what do you call, membership to a medical scheme, and so forth. The one from Martina Moss about the Lesotho students who are abroad, whether they are allowed on repatriation flights. I received a similar question from one of the universities, and my response to them was this: that repatriation flights into South Africa are for South Africans and permanent residents. The Lesotho residents, students are not South Africans. So it's a bit of a challenge there. But because they are in a foreign country, supposedly on a ticket of South Africa, because they are at an institution that has an agreement or an arrangement with a South African institution, we might have to look at this differently according to its merits. So if I can get an email from Martina Moss to say, who are the students, how many are they, and those details, passport numbers and so forth. In fact, the whole inquiry, maybe if she can just send me the whole inquiry by email, and then we'll start to converse via the email and see how I can assist. The one from her also about somebody that is a permanent resident and is in Zimbabwe. A person who is a permanent resident in Zimbabwe can go to the border, show them that they are a permanent resident, and they'll be allowed through. We will be able to allow them through. But, you know, we are not going to be the one arranging how do they come to the border, how do they travel, what car and whatever. But if they present themselves as a permanent resident, they cannot be refused to travel. But then obviously they will be required, for instance, to be quarantined. So when they arrive, the person must know that they will not arrive and go home. They are going to be processed through the Department of Health, where they are going to be held at a quarantine for that specified number of days. But we will not refuse them from coming to or from going through our border as permanent residents. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mbele. Most of the questions in the Q&A are sort of questions that have been addressed, unless, Nombuso, do you have any other specific questions that were sent before the webinar?
Thank you, Norma. Most of the questions have been covered, but there is one or two. The other one is asking about the health insurance. If the permit expired, do they still have to have a medical aid? And there is another one. This person applied before the lockdown. They tried to renew their visas, but it was rejected. Now, before they could reapply, there was a lockdown, so they couldn't do anything. They're still in the country. So they're asking, what do they do now? And the one about the banks have been covered. And there is another South African who is in Zimbabwe. They want to come back into the Republic, but they failing to get hold of the embassy in Zimbabwe. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll start with the one for rejections. If people were rejected either a few days before the lockdown or now during the lockdown, others are collecting and they are finding rejections, they will be allowed to submit their appeals as soon as minister says we accept appeals. So the current concessions also cover them as well, up until they have a chance to to appeal. The same one on the issue of medical aids. Remember, you require a medical aid when you come to apply. So before we issue an announcement that people will apply, or when we do issue an announcement with that, we'll issue it with the requirements to say, because of COVID considerations, this is how we are going to treat medical aid, this, and so people will have enough time to understand the requirements that we have. A South African that is in Zimbabwe, remember, colleagues, a South African does not need a visa to enter into South Africa. If I'm a South African and I have a passport, I can go to the border. I don't have to go to a mission, especially here. The reason why in other countries that are, I would say overseas, people need to go to our mission, it is because the airline needs somebody to confirm that this person is a South African. So he would go to our mission in Delhi and confirm. But here, when a person comes to either through bridge and whatever, and they show us their South African passport, we have the records. We would know that this person is a South African. Does not need to go to a mission. So that person can come through to our border, and we'll be able to process them. They don't have to go to a mission for confirmation of anything. Thank you, Norma.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mbele. There's a question, where is it now? From Tankiso. Apparently, you have Zimbabwean students completing training in 2 to 3 months. He wants clarity on what permits are required for them to return to Zimbabwe. So I'm not sure what sort of permits are they in now. So I don't know why will they need a different permit to go back. I'm not too sure what he's asking here, but maybe you are getting the question. And I've got a question also from let's see. From Google, some students who have applied for renewal of their study permits just before lockdown. I think that was actually answered. A permit is required for them to be registered with the university. They are postgraduate students again who are at their final stages of their research. Will they not be coming back to campus, but are supervised online? Obviously, they are supervised online. For them to submit their work at the end of the year, they need to be registered students. Will Home Affairs be issuing this permit at some stage for those students? And then we also have another question from Mary Ann, she's asking if will the other permits submitted since last year be processed for critical skills? So there was another question as well about application of critical skills. So maybe you can address those questions, Mr. Mbele. Thank you.
Okay, Norma, thank you very much. The first question about Zimbabwean students who are on a permit is a bit vague, so I will not be able to respond to it because it's not clear. I'm not sure what, maybe he or she can give us, you know, a further clarity on that. But generally, we are saying that once we allow for the acceptance of application, every person who needs to come to South Africa to apply for a visa will allow them to do so, whether they are postdocs or whatever the case may be, but we'll decide the requirements at that point. I think all these questions that you've asked now are the same. It's just that maybe there's different circumstances, but we will be issuing visas. And I think the other one also was to US universities, whether do you allow them to register with expired visas, which in the current situation, we are saying, yes, that you should be able to do so.
Yes, thank you, Norma and Mr. Mbele. Yes, the question is, these students don't necessarily need to come back to campus because they are postgraduate students, they are being supervised online. But now, for them to be registered by the university, they need to have these the visa, the permits, the study permit. So the question was, because they don't have to come back to campus, will they be given an opportunity, you know, to get these permits?
Over to you, Mr. Bella. Is that clear enough?
Yeah, it's clear, but I think it's also something that is a function of the university. When those students need to come back to us, we'll be able to issue them a visa. But you know, I could ask another question to say, because some universities have international programs where people study online. What do you do with a student that is abroad and is studying online with you, and they don't have a visa because they are not physically here? How do you register them?
All right. So these students have been here previously, okay? So they've been studying and then they applied for renewal of their visas because they needed to register for the year 2020. Now, whilst in that process, they've sent all the documents, but they are now back in their countries. So they are still not registered. Now we would like them to register for semester 2 so that they can complete their studies, hand in their thesis before the end of the year. But, you know, at this stage, they are not registered because they don't have the study permits. So that is where the problem is. They don't need to come back to the country at this stage.
Okay, Google. Maybe while you are still online, let me remember you are saying these students. I'll call them existing students. They are your existing students, right?
Yes.
And then they were in the process of renewing their visas, which means that they already had a visa that was expiring or is expired, right?
Yes. Yes.
So they were in the process of renewing their visas, and then they had to leave in between. Did they submit applications to us before they left?
I know one of them did submit. One of them was still waiting for a support letter from us. So by the time we gave them this letter of support, then there was lockdown. So I'm not sure if that one did submit, but one of them submitted.
Yeah. No, look, this is the point that I was saying, that if when we open for applications, any person who would have ordinarily applied for a visa before will be allowed to apply for a visa. So they will be allowed to apply.
Okay, so I suppose then the university needs to decide what happens with the registration in the meantime.
Yes, yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr.
All right, Google.
Thank you, Kuku. I think we've actually exhausted the questions. I mean, I know there's still a number of questions, but I would like to apologize if we do not get into to answer your specific questions, but generally, Mr. Mbele has been so gracious to actually cover all the questions that have been raised. And I'd like to thank everyone for attending and also for participating in this webinar. I'm sure a lot of us did get the questions and did get the answers that we're looking for. So it means now it's a matter of us of how we are actually going to take this forward. Mr. Mbele did mention that, universities, they need to come together and lobby for international students. So we have to now do our part in terms of supporting our international students and also engaging with the Minister of Higher Education and Innovation. So that's a part that we have to do. And also the issue of visas, because I know there's a lot of students that were worried about their visas being expired. So we now know that all those visas will be valid until the end of October. And students also are able to go and collect their visas now that VFS has opened from the 1st of July. Obviously, those are the visas that you can collect, meaning your permits, excluding appeals and permanent residences. So people who have applied, and then they can go and pick up those visas. But obviously, new applications, you will be informed when new applications, when Home Affairs is ready to take new application or open for people to apply. But I think we do have an understanding, at least for now, what needs to be done and how we can actually continue to support our international students. We understand also that the pandemic has both revealed and the issues on how people are, all of the universities have actually opted for online because it's the safest way to actually continue with our programs. But the problem is that we know that the access to internet or connectivity is a problem in most countries, especially in Africa. So our students are struggling, including our local students. Obviously, different universities are looking at catch-up programs to ensure that no student is left behind. So this is what, especially at UKZN, that we actually been discussing those kind of programs where we have to make sure that students are not left behind, and we do have catch-up programs that will then take them through the academic year. Like UKZN and other institutions also revise their academic year to ensure that we do get through the 2020, which has been a really difficult year for all of us. So we will do what we can then to make sure that we work closely with your office, and we would like to thank you on behalf of all the participants, all the universities. I know it was not only about UKZN, it was about all the institutions in South Africa, because we are struggling. We have similar challenges, and we're trying to all work together to actually assist our students. Of UKZN and all the other institutions that have joined us today, I would like to thank you for your time and for giving us insight on what we can do as institutions to make sure that we support our students, and we actually lobby in terms of the regulations and so on. So we are really grateful for your time, and thank you so much. And thank you to all the participants as well for joining us. We will upload this webinar on our UKZN YouTube channel, so you can get it there. And for those people who were not able to join us, they'll be able to see the session as well. Thanks again for everything. Thanks, Nambuso. and Shakila for organizing, and would like to then leave I don't know where Laven is. Thank you, Laven. I saw you came back. Thank you for joining us again and for representing Aisa as well. Thank you, colleagues. Thank you, Mr. Mbele. Have a good weekend. Keep distancing and wash those hands. You all stay safe. And hopefully we'll be meeting in person soon. Fingers crossed. Thank you.